Welcome, everyone. I'm Jack Llewellyn, and this is Cartels, Conspiracies, and Camarena. Today, we're going to finish up a three-part dialogue on the Camarena case. So in the last two videos, we talked about common misperceptions regarding the Camarena case. Things that people think are true, things that people have said are true, things that have been widely disseminated as true that really aren't factually accurate. Today, we're going to talk about open remaining questions, things that are important that haven't been answered yet in the Camarena case. As I've explained before, I started working on this case as a summer associate in May of 1990. And here we are sitting in March of 2023 talking. So almost 33 years later. And during that time, I've done a lot of work on the case. I've invested the case a lot. I've talked to a number of people who are involved in the case, both past and present, with all kinds of different information. And yet there are these remaining questions that I think are significant, important questions, things that I want to continue to pursue to try to find the answers to, because I think they are so important, both to the case and to the family. So I have 6 today, not including subparts, that we'll walk through important unanswered questions in the Camarena case. Number 1, why were the interrogations recorded and who were they recorded for? Now, common wisdom says they were recorded for Mexican government officials. Okay. But if that's the case, and you believe that, then you can't believe the words of Jorge Godoy and Rene Lopez Romero, amongst others, because they say that at the interrogation were people like Manuel Bartlett Diaz and General Gardoqui, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if they're there, then there's no need to record for them. Remember, you have to be consistent. You can't take bits and pieces of information from one person and then from another and put together a narrative. It all has to fit together. And the fact of the matter is, we don't really know. It doesn't, if you're going to record for Mexican government officials, then there would be no need for any of them to be at his interrogation. Some would say recorded for the CIA. But even if you believe that, so what does Agent Bareas say? He says that Agent Camarena was picked up because he'd found out about secret missions of the CIA, that a CIA agent, whose name I won't use right now because we're going to talk about him later, and I don't even like having it associated in this manner, but a CIA agent, operative officer, came in, did some recording, and then left. Okay, so if he came in, asked questions, and left, why does the recording continue? And who is that for? I mean, it's got to make logical sense, right? Why does he come in, ask his questions, record them, and then leave the recorder, which then continues to run? For whom? What is the purpose of that? Kind of a side note here is, do we have all of the recordings? I think the conventional answer is no. So if we don't have all of the recordings, then who does, and what do they say? We also know that there are different versions of the tapes, of the recordings. Some of that's based on who's doing the transcription and when. So, short version, I think there's a lot of questions around the recording of the interrogations that goes to other issues that we'll talk about in a couple of moments. Here's a really big one for me, and I'm going to try to explain this in the best way I can, keeping in mind that we may do just a full video on this. Agent Camarena left the American consulate sometime shortly after 2 p.m. on February 7, 1985. Okay. All of the witnesses said he gets up, again, sometime right after 2, says, I'm late. I'm supposed to meet my wife for lunch. And he leaves the American consulate to go to his truck, and that's when he's abducted. But we also know, and we've talked about this before, we also know that at 1:30 he'd walked across the street to the Camelot to give money to Jaime Kirkendall and Alan Bachelor, who were meeting with a confidential informant at the Camelot. And then shortly thereafter, Agents Kirkendall and Camarena walked back across the street. Shortly after that, Agent Bachelor walked back across the street to the American consulate. So you have a very, very narrow window of time when the abductors happen to show up and Agent Camarena happens to leave unaccompanied to go meet his wife. So how did they know when to be there? Some people think that one of the phones used at Agent Camarena's house or the consulate might have been tapped. That's a possibility. But here's the other thing that's really intriguing about this situation. So we know when people were walking back and forth, right? We know from testimony. We know from written statements immediately after the fact when Agent Camarena left. But there's not one witness, there's not one who gives a timeline that fits with what actually happened. So, 2 questions remain. Why can't these witnesses tell a straight story that fits with the time frame we know that has to be true? And none of them mention seeing Agent Camarena and Agent Kirkendall walking across the street. So we have to assume they weren't there at 1:35 or so when Agents Kirkendall and Camarena went from the Camelot back to the consulate. We also know that Alan Bachelor, who followed them a few minutes later, doesn't report anything out of the ordinary. Nobody mentions seeing a different agent. So how did they know to be there right about 2 when Agent Camarena was in a hurry going to his truck to meet his wife for lunch? All right, number 3, as we've talked about before, and I'm not going to belabor this because I don't think it's necessary, but we know somebody finally put Agent Camarena out of his misery, ended the really horrific torture, and killed him. Who was that and who told him to do it? Number 4, we know that several weeks went by from the time Agents Camarena and Captain Zavala were held at Lope de Vega until the DEA ever heard about Lope de Vega. Okay. We also know that before the DEA and FBI got into Lope de Vega, certain materials had been removed from Lope de Vega. And I think and suspect and believe is true, certain evidence was destroyed, corrupted, covered up, etc. So, important questions. Who did that? Why did they do that? And probably more simplistically, what did they take out of Lope de Vega? What evidence was obstructed at Lope de Vega? And what does it say about who was at Lope de Vega when Agent Camarena was there? And what does it say about who interrogated, tortured, and killed Agent Camarena? Number 5, what role, if any, did Felix Gallardo play in Agent Camarena's abduction? Remember, if you will, Sergio Espino Verdin, an important figure in the law enforcement in Guadalajara, said when he was first captured and taken to Mexico City, he was interrogated by the Mexican police, Mexican officials, and DEA personnel were there watching. He initially said Felix Gallardo was not at Lope de Vega. The next day, when the DEA came back for further interrogation of Sergio Espino Verdin, they were told, overnight he remembered that Felix Gallardo actually was there. Keep in mind that the DEA agents that second day actually left the interrogation at some point because it became so brutal with respect to the interrogation of Espino Verdin. Okay. So nobody believes this. He remembered. Right. And if you look at the lead up to Lope de Vega, if you look at all the circumstances around it, if you look at some of the DEA 6 reports from, people around, his name doesn't come up very much. Did he have any motive? Did he have any reason to have Agent Camarena picked up and interrogated? Another little point. Remember the airport confrontation that we've talked about? And if, with Caro Quintero and the DFS agents, and we've talked about the BS story that Hector Borrellas tells that there were 50-some DFS and et cetera, et cetera. But the important part of that is, how did they know, they being the DEA, know to go to the airport? They had picked up communications on radios of Felix Gallardo saying that Felix Gallardo needed money because he was going to the airport. Posit this for a moment. If Felix Gallardo knew he was being listened to, that those radio communications were being listened to by the DEA, then he likely knew that people would be going to the airport, right? And if he knew Caro Quintero was going there, wouldn't that have been a great way to set up Caro Quintero? Wouldn't that have been a great way to end everything right away? Hey, there's the man responsible for the kidnapping of your agent. You got him. Good job. Now let's move on. So what role did he really play? Now, we will remember that he had an interview on Univision a little while ago, which I think was purely designed to get sympathy so that he could get home arrest. He didn't do a very good job of getting sympathy. It was a terrible interview. He says he didn't even really know Fonseca and Caro Quintero. That's BS. Everybody knows that. So the answers may not really lie just with the words of Felix Gallardo, but I think his role would be really critical to know, to understand the totality of the circumstances surrounding Agent Camarena's abduction. Okay, closely tied to that is my last question. Why was he picked up? What was the real motive? Caro Quintero was mad about Buffalo. That's a possibility. Even though Camarena didn't really have anything to do with Buffalo, Caro Quintero might not have known that. The Mexican government wanted him picked up because they were worried about things that had happened with the congressional representatives and the congressional delegates that had come in. That's what Narcos Mexico wants you to believe. Hector Borrellas and the last narc folks want you to believe that the CIA was so worried about something that Camarena might have found out that they had him picked up and interrogated and killed. There have been a few more salacious suppositions, hypotheticals, possibilities raised over the years. Don't want to talk about those. I don't think this is a proper forum for that. Bottom line is, we don't know. I think any of the real possibilities has some holes in it. Gun to my head? I think I know the answer, but I certainly don't know for sure. I don't think anybody knows for sure. And at its base, if you're going to understand the Camarena case, if you're going to hold people accountable, the motive is the most important thing, right? We got to know that. So that's something still in the forefront, still on my mind as we continue to look into the Camarena case of what is the motive. And maybe Rafael Caro Quintero will be extradited to the United States. Maybe he'll be tried in Los Angeles for crimes related to the abduction and torture and murder of Agent Camarena. And maybe that trial of Caro Quintero will answer some of these questions. In the meantime, we're going to continue to look. We're going to continue to probe. We're going to continue to ask questions. And we're going to continue to investigate. And as we learn more, we're going to share it with you on Cartels, Conspiracies, and Camarena. Have a great day.